Those wires are coated in a special polymer that means the skin doesn't all fall apart and rot around the hole that the wires go in or out of. That was a development from the space race. Another thing is that's really important about what we get from space are composite materials. Everything around us now is made up of all sorts of different composite materials, ceramics and fiberglass is a very simple early example, carbon composites, Kevlar. A lot of these materials, and not just the materials but the way of manipulating them and making things out of them, were developed to make certain components for satellites, for spacecraft, and all sorts of other things that we use, that we need to utilise in order to get into space in the first place. A really cool, and I like this very much, development that they've come up with from the space program is one of the engineers from NASA a few years ago had a massive heart attack and he was rushed to hospital and they needed to do a transplant. And the two surgeons that did the transplant had been working on artificial hearts, on artificial blood pumps, to not just replace the heart but to help people with a weak heart so they didn't have to have a transplant at all. And when he eventually recovered, he got chatting to these two surgeons and they said they were having this problem and that problem and all sorts of things and it wasn't working and the devices were too complicated and they weren't reliable, and obviously if it's pumping the blood around your body it needs to be absolutely reliable. You can't sort of just take it out and change a bearing. And he said, I know a couple of guys I work with that can help with that. They designed the pumps on the space shuttle that pump the fuel to the engines. These pumps are the size of this piece of room. They're enormous. They said there's no reason we can't miniaturise them. They have now developed a tiny, tiny, tiny little pump with one single moving part that will last longer than the human body, and they can put it inside. They tried it out in cats and dogs first, which might seem a bit cruel, but they tried it like they have to with all these things on animals, but also because the way the pump works, it means you don't have a pulse. It's a continuous flow of blood. And for no particular medical reason, they assumed that the human body needs a pulse. So they tried them out on animals, and they worked. And there are now several hundred, I think it's nearing 400 people around the world that have one of these, in addition to their heart, which is weak and would otherwise need transplanting, keeping them alive. And I think it would be really cool to have your pulse taken, and there's none there. And you're perfectly well alive and waiting breathing and you haven't got a pulse. Not only is it a fantastic life-saving piece of technology, I think it's also pretty cool. Another thing that I really like, and I only discovered the other day, is a thing called liquid metals. It's a special composite alloy that they've made. It's an amorphous matrix composite alloy, and it has some incredibly brilliant engineering properties. It's lighter than titanium, it's stronger than titanium, it withstands impact, shock and deformation better than any other known metallic substance. And they now use it. The first development that we might have come across was the company Head that makes sports equipment made a tennis racket with it, because it was very, very light and it didn't bend, and if you smacked the tennis racket on the ground it would bend and then just flex back again. Another development that's close to my heart, I'm a snowboarder, they haven't put it in snowboards yet, but they put it in skis, and it changes the dynamics of the way the skis flex depending on the temperature because of the properties of this material. So we get things that are fun. We get things that are a bit silly maybe with the racing Formula 1 drivers, but still entertaining. We get things that are really important life-saving technologies, like scanning, like the artificial heart, like lifeboats, like pieces of material for reconstructive surgery, and all sorts of stuff if you replace a joint. When you replace a joint like a hip joint, again, the joint wears down, so we have to coat it with materials to stop it wearing down, and the body attacks those materials. NASA's developed special polymer materials that avoid that eating away by the body's defences, and it means instead of having your hip replaced every couple of years, you can have a hip replaced and you might never need it doing again for 20 or 30 or 40 years or till the end of your life. So they change lots of things we do. But there's a bigger reason for going into space, and that's why I've got all these pictures going around. We go into space because space is the final frontier, and I know that's a really cheesy thing to say, but it is. And as human beings, what we do is explore frontiers, psychologically, emotionally, and physically. It's what makes us different to all the other things. It's why we got out of the trees. It's why that person stuck their head out of the cave one morning and went, I wonder what's over there. It's why we built boats and sailed over the horizon. We go out to discover, to explore, and forget the money, forget the technological feedback, forget all of that. More than anything else, what we need to do as human beings, what drives us, and I think if we stop doing it, we'd regress, we'd go backwards, we'd lose our purpose for being. What drives us is to go out and explore and find new things. And by doing that, we generate all of this new technology. The space program is going to continue. We're going to build new satellites, we're going to build robotic probes, we're going to send things to the moon and to Mars. But there's no substitute for standing there and sticking your hands in the dirt. That will never ever, you can never ever replace that. One of the Mars rovers already, it's possible, I'm not sure if it's the one that stopped working actually, it got stuck. You could control it from here. They used to take a thing around and kids in schools could log on to a particular website and send it commands and tell it to look left or look right or look up or look down, which is fantastic. We're bringing in a whole new generation of people into that fervour, that desire to go out and look at what's out there. And I think it's something we're really in danger of losing. We need to go out and see what there is to be seen. It's why people climb mountains, it's why I jump off them on a silly plank of wood. It might just be a sports activity, it might be an adrenaline rush, but the piece inside of here and inside of here that drives us to do that is the same as the thing that made those guys sit on top of £500,000 of high explosive and say, light the candle. And I think we need to keep that going forward. So for all, it's not really spending cuts, it's a diversion. And the diversion, unfortunately, is political. It's into putting money into private enterprise. They're getting rid of the space shuttle. It's had its life, it's worn out, they're not going to replace it. How are we going to get people to the space station? Beardy Branson's going to do it, probably. It's going to go out to private industry. Okay? Actually, the people that are going to be doing it for the first few missions are the Russians. How ironic is that? All of that money spent on the space race for politically bashing the communists, and now it's going to be them sending American civilians and American scientists up to the space station to do their job because the American government decides they haven't got the money to do it anymore. Another thing that's bad about cutting this, that's probably not being reported, is there's 23,000 people going to lose their jobs when they get rid of the space shuttle and they cancel the Constellation program. That's quite a lot of people, highly trained, highly motivated scientists, engineers, all sorts of people, medical people, mathematicians, physicists, that are all going to be laid off because they no longer have a job and no longer have a purpose for what they do. And those people here, and there's quite a few of them I know that are in the world of science and technology, know that it's not just about money, it's